Hello, everybody. It is Friday, August 28th, 2015. I am Corey Stolzenbach, joined by a very special guest right now. He was an All-Star back in 1982. He is the only player ever to win 3 World Series titles with 3 different teams in a single decade. He did that in the 1980s in a 6-year span. He was part of the 1980 Phillies, the 1982 Cardinals, and the 1985 Royals. He stole 370 bases in his career as an outfielder. He is Lonnie Smith. And Lonnie, 3 World Series in a 6-year span. Does any one stick out to you more than the other?
Well, the 82 one I was pretty proud of, but, outside of that, they were all pretty special.
Well, I'm sure they were, and you broke through in the late 70s with the Phillies, and you did have some chances in 1978 and 1979, but your big break came in 1980 because you finished third in the National League Rookie of the Year voting. Where did the big change come from between 1979 and 1980 that you put your way into the Phillies lineup?
Oh, I think it was just that I became more comfortable playing on that level, and I was more comfortable with the players on the team at that time. And in 1980, Pete Rose joined the team, and he's very instrumental in helping me feel a little more relaxed as a player.
Could you elaborate on that? Because I know that Pete Rose is usually seen as having a lot of flair, a lot of intensity on the field, so that definitely surprises me. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, basically, I hit behind him when I first started playing, as well as before, ahead of him at times. And Pete always prided himself on being one of the best leadoff hitters in baseball because of his ability to get on base. And he encouraged me to do the same, not just get up there and slap the ball, try to hit the ball a little more with dignity and authority to the opposite field, as well as, the gaps, and just to run hard. So it wasn't as though he was just there. He was also there encouraging everybody in the club. And plus, my locker was next to his, so I got to see a lot and hear a lot.
Well, I mean, Pete would know because he was a guy who was on that big red machine, who's no stranger to leadership and veteran clubhouse guys. So that 1980 NLCS is a classic, Lonnie, and you guys just barely won the division over the Montreal Expos. You're facing the Houston Astros. You're down 2-1 in the series. What was going on in that Phillies clubhouse that you were able to get yourself some good sentiment, bring yourselves to overcome elimination, and win the pennant?
Well, it was just a good, positive attitude. I mean, not only did we have Pete there, we also had Tug McGraw, who also had a never give up and, you can do it and type of atmosphere and just motivated everyone, as well as we had some good quality players, and Mike Smith, and one of the best center fielders in the game at the time was Gary Maddox, and Larry Bowen, Manny Trio, Bob Boone. I mean, we had a pretty good team, so it wasn't as though that we just gave up on each other. Most people thought we wouldn't be able to make it because we had, I believe that year, 10 rookies on the team, but we also had a good quality group of backup players, and Greg Gross, Dale Unser, and the guys just really had a lot of confidence in going out there and doing the job.
I'm sure it didn't hurt either having Steve Carlton as your ace and winning his 3rd Cy Young Award that season.
Oh, no. That was back when games were fun and short.
Well, anyway, there was the Sabre Convention last year in Houston, Sabre 44 for Sabermetrics, and there was Kenny Hand, who's a Texas sports reporter, and he was covering the Houston Astros at the time for the Houston Post. 1980 was the year that J.R. Richard went down with a stroke, and Kenny Hand said, he was the moderator of that panel with some of the members of the 1980 Houston Astros. He said that if J.R. Richard did not go down with a stroke, he thinks they would have beaten the Phillies and also beaten the Royals to win the World Series. What's your response to that?
Well, I can't say if they would have beat the Royals, but it would definitely been a lot tougher to beat the Astros if he hadn't gone down. I know at the time, before he went down, the guys on the team were always talking about that he threw one of the hardest sliders in the game, and that he was a very tough competitor. And the Astros had some good, tough pitchers, and who knows? Maybe he's right, but things like that do happen.
Tell me about Game 4. You misjudge a fly ball by Enos Cabell that ended up being a double. Then Gary Woods walked. Art Hall flies out to you. Then a ball slips from your hand and Cabell scores. Woods goes to second. You try to advance to third. You throw him out. This is bottom of the fourth. What happened with all this, Lonnie? It was a very busy inning for you in the bottom of the fourth in Game 4 of the 1980 NLCS.
To be honest with you, I really don't know. You would think that would be something that I didn't forget. I really can't remember what was going through my head. I just know that, I had some rough patches at times, during my rookie year as well as during my career. So, and to answer that question for you, I wish I could, but I can't at this moment.
That's perfectly fine, Lonnie. That's perfectly fine. But you guys ended up winning in the 10th inning of Game 5 to win the pennant, and you guys take down KC in 6 games. And it's so funny because I was watching a little bit of that Mets-Phillies game last night on MLB Network, and they were showing when Tub McGraw struck out Willie Wilson, Bob Boone had his hands clenched in the air, and you guys were celebrating those two of the World Series title. How long did it take you to sink in that you had just won the World Series, that this team had just won it all for the first time ever?
Oh, it didn't take very much time at all. I mean, we were all, on pins and needles hoping for the best at that moment. And as soon as it happened, we pretty much knew that we had just won the biggest game of our career at the time, and it was a very eventful moment for, a lot of us first-timers as well as guys that had the experience of at least going there and winning it.
Here's the thing, though, Lonnie, is that you guys were the last of the original 16 teams to finally win the World Series. The Phillies had been to the World Series in 1915 and 1950. They lost both times. There was the fold of 1964. They went to the NLCS a few times in the late 70s, and they lost. So how much pressure was there on you guys? How much pressure was there on that group right there to finally come through?
Well, I don't think it was as much pressure on me personally. I'm sure there was some pressure on some of the veteran guys like Mike, Larry Boa, Gary Maddox, Bob Boone, guys who had been there and experienced, the playoffs, but not going to the final dance. And it might have been some pressure, as to be there. Being a rookie as I was just in awe of everything that was happening. The people, the photographers, the television, So I didn't feel the pressure until probably I stepped up in the batter's box for the first time. And then after that, I think everything subsided.
That's when you realized it was all real, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you get traded to St. Louis for the 1982 season. It's probably the best year of your career. You're a run-up to Dale Murphy in the MVP race. You steal 68 bases, score 120 runs, and really contrasting styles going from Philadelphia to St. Louis because Mike Schmidt hit 31 home runs in 1981, and then George Hendrick and Darrell Porter would combine to hit exactly as many home runs in 1982 as Schmidt did the previous year. You have George Hendrick hitting 19 home runs, Darrell Porter hitting 12. And so what was it like for you having to adjust to Whitey ball in that style of offense?
Well, it really wasn't that much to adjust to because technically that was the type of ball I was playing in the minor leagues with the Phillies. It's just that when I came up through the Phillies organization and made it to the top, it was a different type of team. And I wasn't asked to go out there every day because I wasn't an everyday ball player, but to go out there and just play the way I did in the minor leagues. And that was, lead off, steal, score, lead off, steal, score, slap the ball, walk, that type of thing. I was just there to boost them whenever they needed me, as much as I was available for them. When I got to St. Louis, it was my first year as an everyday ball player. And Whitey just turned me loose. He says, you're going to be our leadoff hitter. You get on, you steal, we're going to run until I tell you not to run. Because we didn't have the type of team based on power. We had a lot of speed. And we had good defense up the middle. And we had a good, consistent pitching staff. So the only way we were going to win was to be as active on the base pass if we could. Steal, bunt, hit and run, that sort of thing. So we weren't designed to hit a lot of home runs. And the ballpark at the time in Busch Stadium was a good-sized ballpark. So we were a gap-hitting team.
Yes, indeed. And you stole 68 bases, Lonnie, which is very impressive, but you were also caught stealing 26 times. What were your instincts on the base paths, and what could you have done to get rid of those caught stealings, to cut them down?
Well, let's see, a percentage of those were based on pickoffs as well as getting caught stealing. But what most people don't talk about, I didn't steal third base. Everything I did was from first to second, and that was it. And, yeah, I got caught. I mean, there were some good catches. Sometimes I had bad jumps. Sometimes I just got caught. And it wasn't until I started losing some of my speed later in my career that I started to attempt to steal third base. But I never really stole third base. I was just, second base. And that was it, because I knew I could score on a base hit. Sometimes I could score on infield hits when they weren't paying any attention, because that was the style of ball we were playing. And I did get caught 26 times, but it was also the first time I was turned loose in the big leagues to steal. And it wasn't as though I was studying pitchers. I was just boating and hoping and banking on my speed. And that's basically I was. Later on in my career, I tried to get a little better at it, but, my style of play evolved as the season and the years went on, so... But that was the first year I had the opportunity just to run wild.
Well, you definitely cashed in on that. You guys were able to sweep the Braves in the NLCS. Relative views, you outscored them 17-5 over a 3-game span, and you helped chase Pascual Perez, may he rest in peace, in Game 1, 6th inning. The World Series, it was different, though, Lonnie, because people always ask, well, what wins championships in baseball? Some say pitching wins championships, pitching and defense, small ball. Certainly you guys were a small ball group. Then you're facing the Brewers, known as Harvey's Wallbangers. They hit 216 home runs during the regular season. You got all these guys, Gorman Thomas, Ben Ogilvy, Cecil Cooper. Robin Yount won the MVP that year. And yet you guys, a small ball team, you defeated Harvey's Wallbangers 4-3 in a 7-game series. So what does win championships? Should we believe that small ball can beat power? Is that the way to do it?
I don't think one defeats the other more so than the other. It's just who's playing better at the time. I mean, good pitching, they say, always stops good hitting. Well, sometimes good hitting beats good pitching. Basically is whatever team is playing the best at the time, but not making the mistakes, and outscoring the other one in the long run. I mean, there's a lot of mathematics involved in, people thinking that you could do this, do that, and win, but it doesn't always pay that way. Sometimes the weakest team plays better than the best of the teams. It's just who's ever playing best at the time. What pitcher's ever hitting his spot. Whatever guy is getting the key hits during the key moments. What umpire may blow a call here or there. It varies. Nothing's ever as easy as it points to be, because technically Kansas City should have won last year, but they didn't.
And what do you mean technically by that? I want to know what you could elaborate on that for, because they did run into Madison Bumgarner last year, but I want to know what you're alluding to.
Well, if it wasn't for Madison, you could say the same thing, like when you mentioned J.R. Richards. If Madison Bumgarner wasn't there, then they probably would have won, Kansas City. But still, they had their opportunities. They just weren't able to capitalize on them. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from San Francisco, I believe, and still believe they're a great team. But it really boils down to who's playing the best at the time of the game and who's getting the breaks. You alluded to the game last night, with the Mets and the Phillies. Well, the Mets had a number of opportunities to win that game, but it wasn't until the 12th till they finally won it.
You sure do still follow up, because some of the other players in the interview, they don't pay attention that much. You, Lonnie, you for sure, you watch a lot of the games. You sure know what you're talking about.
Well, I'm not saying I know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking what I feel, what I believe. I mean, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, Fayetteville, Georgia, and the Braves are on almost every night. And thanks to MLB Network, sometimes I can watch a game there and, other places. So I watch, I listen, but every team is different. Every situation is different. No one can actually say who should be. The Mets aren't supposed to be where they are, but they are. The Nationals are supposed to be winning it all, but they're not. So we'll see.
Well, the Mets definitely have great offense after they acquire Yoenis Cespedes. He's really jump-started that offense. Back to you, Lonnie, though. You hit .321 that 1982 World Series. You only hit .263 in 1980. What was different for Lonnie Smith in that World Series versus 2 years prior?
Say that again. I didn't quite hear it all.
Just want to know what was different for you in the 1982 World Series versus 1980, because in 1982 you hit .321 in that Fall Classic. Just 2 years prior you hit .263.
Well, I was still trying to feel my way in. I mean, Kansas City had some good starters. It was still like a little bit in awe. I did what I could when I got the opportunity to play. I mean, I played every game in St. Louis. I didn't play every game, with the Phillies, but I was a part of, what they could do. And, I wasn't really probably primed. That was my first year playing in that many, or being a part of that many games, coming from 125 games in the minor leagues to 162 in the majors, plus what at that time it was 12 extra, 5 playoffs and 7 World Series. So, I wasn't accustomed to playing during that time of the season, but that's not an excuse. It's just what I think.
What we have to discuss about is cocaine and the Pittsburgh drug trial. This was March of 1984. You told the Associated Press your father was an alcoholic. That left you wide open to drugs. You started turning to cocaine. You said you were in high school in L.A. when you started doing drugs, and apparently this was Venezuela, Winter Ball in 1977. You started doing cocaine. Who or what had introduced you to all of this? Was it peer pressure?
I wouldn't say it was just peer pressure, more so curiosity. It was there, it was around. I tried it. Unfortunately for me, I enjoyed it. And later on, it became a terrible habit for me.
Right, and then the climax got to in the summer of 1983 when you told Whitey about all this, and you couldn't sleep the night before. You went to go see him, and you told him about your problem. How were you able to hide your addiction from everybody else?
Well, I think I was only able to hide it from a small group of people who just didn't know me that well. I wasn't really that outgoing or flamboyant. I mean, I enjoyed playing with my teammates. My teammates enjoyed me playing with them, but they didn't really know me because I was kind of a solitary person. The one person that I knew better than anyone over there was Dane Orge, because we came through the Philly organization together, and he kind of knew, but he didn't know how to approach me. The late, great Bob Forrest felt that I had some type of problem going on, but he didn't know how to approach me. The same way with Darryl Porter. They didn't know how to approach me, and you would think Darryl would know how, but Darryl didn't know exactly how to approach me. One, because they didn't really know me that well. It wasn't until I came out of rehab that I got to know my teammates a lot better and closer, and they got to know me. So that was probably the best way I was able to hide what I was doing from most of the guys. But there were some guys that had suspicions. They just didn't know how to approach me.
And talking about that conversation with Whitey, was he upset, angry at you, angry at the situation? Was he worried? Was he concerned? What do you remember about that conversation with Whitey when you told him what happened?
Well, what I remember the most was that when I told him, he looked a little surprised because he didn't think that I was having that type of a problem at the moment, because most people didn't think I was, because I was batting .300 at the time. But then he was a little, I wouldn't say that he was mad, maybe a little hurt. was, at the time, and I told him that I was under influence at the moment and that I couldn't play and I needed help. And he said, okay, just hang around in the training room. We'll tell somebody you got diarrhea or whatever, or the flu, and I'll contact the people back in St. Louis, and they'll, contact somebody to take care of you, because they had a players, well, not a players, but an employees assistant plan, since they were owned by the Bush Corporation at the time. So I got a call later on that night. I spoke to a doctor. They flew me out the next day, and that same day I checked into a rehab center.
Right, and you said the 1985 Pittsburgh drug trials that you had stopped using at that point, and that the last time you had used was in 1983. What do you remember about your rehab that you were able to come clean?
Well, for one thing, you have to want to come clean, to get clean. What I remember most is that it was a learning process. It was a good atmosphere when I arrived at the place. I not only had 2 doctors, but I also had a couple of counselors. We went to sessions. We talked. I got to know people. I got to let out a little bit of frustration as well as emotions that I kept inside. When the day came for me to leave, they told me that I may not want to leave, because if I'm getting better, you want to stay, and I wound up staying another week because I didn't feel comfortable leaving at the time. So, but I met some new friends. Hopefully they're still clean to this day if they're still living. But it was a moving experience. It wasn't easy, but the people were there to support me all the way.
Well, I'm glad you got the support you did, because what I'm curious about is that you were having another fantastic season in 1983. You ended up batting .321, second only to Bill Madlock in the National League. He batted .323, so you just missed out on the batting crown. But when you're addicted to certain things, Lonnie, how does someone like you not only play baseball, which is such a mental game, but also excel at it?
That's a question that it's hard to really answer outside of I truly love the game of baseball. I played it with the passion of wanting to win all the time. I wanted to succeed. Whether I did well or not, I still loved the game, and I was ready to come back the next day. As far as trying to understand why it was that way, I try not to dwell on it. I mean, I love the game of baseball, and that's what kept me going. And as long as I stayed clean, I know I would get a chance to continue to play the game of baseball professionally. And that was something that I worked hard at trying to do well in, and also be a part of for as long as I could before it was time for me to leave. So that kept me on the straight and narrow mostly.
And you certainly had a very productive career. During that 1983 season, the Cardinals finished 79-83. Obviously not good enough to go back and try and defend the World Series championship. And not that one player makes a team, Lonnie, but if you don't have the problems you have, where does St. Louis end up that year?
I really don't know. I would like to say, without a doubt, that they probably would have went back to the World Series, but I can't say that. They had good enough players to succeed. Unfortunately, it just didn't turn out that way, and maybe me going into rehab for those 40-something days might have affected them, to a degree. I would prefer it not being that way, but who's to say that it wasn't?
Right, and when you testified in Pittsburgh, you said that you also did cocaine with Keith Hernandez and Joaquin Andujar. Do you remember at all, or care to share how you guys bonded together when you guys were doing it?
Well, I never said that.
No.
I don't know where you got that from, but I never pointed the finger at anyone. They were interviewed by the FBI agents, but I never said who I was doing it with or whom. I only said that I was purchasing it from a person, and I was introduced to that person from another teammate of mine.
That other person being Curtis Strong?
Yeah, well, the dealer was Curtis Strong, and I was introduced to him by Dick. Oh God, what was Dick's last name? I played with him in Philly. Dick Davis, excuse me. But I never said that I was doing it with Joaquin or Keith Hernandez. We were all interviewed that same year by the FBI people.
You'll have to forgive me, Lonnie, because I'm pretty sure that I saw an article on it from the Associated Press that was archived from around that time. I could send it to you if you want, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read, unless I misread or you don't remember.
I'm not saying that you didn't read it. All I'm saying is that I never said that. And a lot of people assumed a lot of things that I said and did, just like there were a number of people who assumed that I was arrested, that I was busted 2 or 3 times, and these were media people. And I told them no. I mean, when Otis Nixon went in 91, a lot of them thought that I had been arrested and busted and drugged, failed drug test and everything 3 or 4 times. I said, no, that never happened. I only went in voluntarily to do my rehab, and I was approached by my manager, Whitey, who told me that there were some FBI agents who wanted to speak to me, and that the league had gave them permission to talk to me, and that just go tell them the truth and get this over with. I met with them that day. I told them, yes, I knew Curtis Strong. Yes, I knew this other individual who I had bought cocaine from in St. Louis. And I told them, yes, I did it. And I told them how I did it. And they handed me a subpoena. And next thing I know, I was in the trial. Well, the grand jury. Then after that, they handed me another subpoena, then the trial. But I never pointed fingers at anyone. Now, the Associated Press may believe that, but I never spoke to anyone from the Associated Press. Now, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just trying to set the record straight between you and I. People are going to believe what they want to believe.
I could always send you the article and tell you where I found that, but that was in 1985 when you were with the Royals. You were traded to them in the middle of the season, and that would end up being 30 years ago when you won your final ring. And not only that, but you became the first player ever to play in the World Series against a team that traded you earlier in the season. I know the Rangers did that a few times earlier this decade. They got Benji Molina from the Giants, I think, and then there was a Giants and Rangers 2010. The next year, they traded Arthur Rose to the Cardinals, so that's happened a few times since. But what could be said about the 1985 Royals, that they came back down 3-1, not once but twice, first to the Blue Jays in the ALCS and the Cardinals in the World Series?
Well, it was a club that I enjoyed playing with. There were a lot of good people on that club. Of course, the team was basically based around George Brett, so as George moved, so did the team moved. And, we had some steady players. We had a lot of good key hits from a lot of players that don't get mentioned too often, like Daryl Motley and Pat Sheridan. Got some big key hits, playoffs, World Series, We got some key hits from Jim Sundberg, Steve Balboni, Hal McRae. It was a good club, and we had some good pitching, and of course we had the late Dan Quisenberry to close out games for us. So a lot could be said about that club because it had a lot of heart, worked hard. It was an organization that I struggled being in. Because I had to change my whole style of playing, the way the game was played. They played it entirely different. The games were longer. It took me a while to adjust to the league, but it was enjoyable. That year was very enjoyable.
And I'm sure we could all agree on one thing, what that 1985 World Series is most famous for. When you saw it live as it happened, was George Orta safe or out to you?
I think the whole world knew that he was out, but we weren't going to argue the call. unfortunately, things like that happen in baseball. You know, it's part of what I'm saying. Sometimes umpires make the wrong call. Sometimes they make the right call. That happened to be the wrong call, but it was a blessing for us.
I'm sure you're glad there was no instant replay back then in that situation.
Well, I'm sure if you go back with a lot of these games from the World Series past histories of instant replay, a lot of teams will probably still be playing.
But you guys won Game 7, 11-0 the next night, and you ended up winning 2-1 in Game 6. How fair is it to say that call cost the Cardinals the World Series?
Very fair. Most likely, if the call went the right way, they would have won. I truly believe that.
Right. And you mentioned Dane Orge earlier, and you guys actually played against his brother Garth Orge in the ALCS that year. So those two brothers playing against each other. You guys were on the 82 Cardinals and the 85 Royals. I know you talked about him earlier with your problems. So how is your relationship like with Dane Orge?
Well, we don't see each other that often except at card shows, but we still respect each other, and I have nothing but high respect for Dane, because it seemed like wherever I showed up, Dane was already there. It's like I said, we came through the Phillies organization together in the minor leagues. He was there in St. Louis. He was there in Kansas City. And he was a good friend the whole time through, and, you know, God bless him.
Well, he didn't follow you to Atlanta, though, because you joined the Braves in 1988, and that was not very good. You have 3 straight last place finishes from 1988 to 1990, and during that 1990 season, the Braves fired Russ Nixon, they brought back Bobby Cox. How would you think the two men were separated as managers? What makes Bobby Cox different from Russ Nixon as a skipper?
I just felt that even though I liked playing for Russ, Russ was a little more disciplined. He was more drill sergeant type. Bobby was a little more flexible, you know, although Bobby wouldn't let you step out of line, but he's a little more flexible, you know, and I enjoyed playing for both men, but Bobby was, like I said, a lot more flexible than Russ. Russ wanted it done this way and it had to be done that way. If it wasn't done that way, then it wasn't done the right way, you know, and you know, as long as you didn't cross Bobby, he gave you that leeway.
Do you think the players stopped playing for Russ?
Excuse me?
Do you think the players in Atlanta stopped playing for Russ because at times in sports, if players don't like a manager or a coach, they stop playing for them. They don't want to play for them anymore?
It's a possibility, but when I got there in 88, it seemed like they accepted that they weren't a very good team, even though I thought they had some decent players and that they could compete, but they went out and played like they were playing individually and not as a team. And although Russ tried to direct them to play as a team, it just didn't work. I mean, you have a loose end here, a loose end there. If they would just buckle down and tighten up, you know, everything would follow right. And it's like I said, I don't think he did a bad job in managing. The players just accepted that they were going to lose 100 games, and that was it. And that's the way it looked like when I got there. And in 89, even though we struggled, we played a little better as a team under Russ until he, you know, lost his job.
That was in 1990, yes. And thinking of some current managers right now, how Joe Madden with the Cubs, he holds his guys accountable, but he's pretty relaxed. He's laid back, and so is Bruce Bochy, I think, too. A lot of players like playing for Bruce Bochy. So is that the key, Lonnie, that you want to play for guys who are more laid back, and as long as you don't cross the line that you're good, as opposed to someone like Russ? Is that what the key is for a successful manager in the big leagues?
I wouldn't say that's a key. I think the key is to be able to communicate with your players on the same level as a human being, and not as I'm the boss and you're the employee. Also, to have a good idea of how the game should be played. And then, not only that, but to encourage the guys to go out and play. I mean, after all, they are grown men, but sometimes grown men don't act like grown men, they act like little boys. But there's a lot of respect that needs to be given both ways. You have to understand that he's there with a job, His job is to make you perform. Now, you may feel like you should be out there, and you're not out there, but you have to accept it. It's your role. And you have to go out there and play as a team. And I think there are a number of these managers out there now that have a lot of respect amongst their players, and the players want to go out there and play for them. It's just like Lasorda all those years. Guys wanted to go out and play for Lasorda. Lasorda was there, encouraging them to go out and play. It wasn't like he was so laid back that, that just happened. He took control when he had to take control, but he was able to communicate with his players. Same way with Bobby Cox. The best manager I ever played for that I wish was still in the game was Jim Leland. Jim Leland was, in my opinion, one of the better managers, although he may not get the respect and the look as, like La Russa and Bobby Cox and all them, but he was one of the most easiest guys to talk to. He was one of the most forceful managers when he had to be, and you wanted to play for him. And he knew the game. You may not like what happened, but you knew that he went down the right path at the right time, whether the guy, performed the job or not. But he was such a pleasure to play for because it was like family and a leader.
Well, Jim Leland did have the success. He went to the World Series 3 times. He won once. You guys beat him twice in the early 90s, the NLCS, when he managed the Pirates. And that's when you guys really took off in 1991. And the year before, you guys had finished last. You went from worst to first. You went to the World Series. And it was really an up-and-down series for you, Lonnie. You hit 3 home runs in that World Series, but also you were part of a lot of things too, a lot of memorable moments, some good, some not so good. I can also think of when Ron Gant had hit that single and you're on second base, and they're doing a hit and run, you go to third base, and Ron Gant is pulled off the bag at first base by Ken Herbeck and tagged out. And he was called out, and Pat Corrales and Ron Gant, they're both very upset. I can only imagine how upset you must have been yourself. I don't know if you saw it live or not, but the fact that Ken Herbeck pulled Ron Gant off the bag, you must not have been very happy, I can imagine.
Well, no one was. And the sad part about it was that the umpire was right there, and he saw that he was lifting him up off the bag, and that he was, pushing him off the bag as well. But he felt that Ronnie came off the bag. Anyone that sees the play know that he didn't come off the bag, that he was lifted off the bag, and that he was forced off the bag. Herbeck had to outweigh him at least by 50 pounds. But like I said, you get the calls, you don't get the calls.
Right, and should that not have been an obstruction call? It looked like obstruction to me.
Well, like I said, if we had instant replay to this day, we'd probably still be playing. But, during that particular time, the umpire felt he made the right call. Regardless of what had happened after that, it wouldn't have changed one bit.
And then Game 4 in that series, you do hit a tying home run, which is good for you, but also another memorable play in that series that you were involved in was Game 4. This is Terry Pendleton. He hits a fly ball deep to center field of Kirby Puckett's head. That ricochets off the center field wall, and then Puckett plays it. He throws to Chuck Knobloch, who relays it to home to Brian Harper, and then you collide with Brian Harper at home plate, and you're called out. And the first thing that Tim McCarver says, that's a terrible base running play by Lonnie Smith. But hold on a second, Lonnie. Jimmy Williams is in his first year as third base coach that season. He's waving you around. He said that you can come on home. He's trying to signal you home, and Jack Buck is wondering why you were brought home in that situation. But you were just doing what the third base coach was telling you to do, so how much of that is really your fault if you were being waved around?
Well, anytime you're thrown out, it's your fault. The biggest mistake I made on that play, and most people don't realize, when I was in the American League, I used to see Kirby Puckett go off the wall and catch balls all the time. Instead of just going halfway and waiting to see how the play developed, I started back towards second base because I thought he might have a play on the ball. And when he didn't have a play, then I took off running. By the time I got to third, he was waving me home, but unfortunately, I just didn't have enough gas in the tank to make it all the way. I was thrown out easily. My only option I had was to try to knock the ball loose out of Brian, and I really hated to do that because I played with Brian, and I know he's a strong, physical, fit guy, but I had no choice. If I had just stopped and let him tag, I would have been booed. If I ran him over, even though I'm still out, at least people would have known that I was trying. You know, announcers are going to make their own little decisions either way, you know, and McCarver, as I'm sure you're leading up to the other play, also made his so-called decision on the play. And even though I told my story, people prefer the story that came out amongst the media because most of them were mad at me because I didn't speak to the media. I didn't like talking to the media. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you must not mind the media right now. You are talking to an interviewer right now, so...
I understand, but you see, I'm not in the game anymore.
Okay, so it's different now.
It's different. I don't mind speaking to the media. I spoke to the media during courses of my career, but a lot of times it backfired on me because of certain media people I spoke to wrote what they felt and not what I said. And it's better that during that time that I didn't speak to anyone because it would have made no difference at all because whether they wrote the story the way I said it, which I say 60% of the time they did, the other 40% they added their own little sugar to it.
Well, I can't speak to that because I was not in any of the clubhouses when you played, so I can't really attest to that. If that's how I was, I'm sorry, but I know a lot of athletes
don't have to apologize. It's just the way it was with me. I mean, it happens. I mean, during that time, during, media in Philadelphia, heck, where was it, like 8 newspapers? So they were all in competition. So people only wanted to read about the story that was a little more flavorful than the one that was bland, So I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just telling you how I felt during that period of time in my life. That's it.
Well, your honesty is certainly appreciated. You said I was leading up to the other play. I'm sure that you've been asked about it a million times, Lonnie, the base running gaff in Game 7, where Pendleton hit that ball left center field. You stop, you fall for the decoy going on between Knobloch and Greg Gagne. So I'm going to give you the chance to explain your perspective because this was a major moment in your career. This was Game 7 of the World Series. And like I said, I'm sure you've been asked about it a lot, but go ahead and tell me about that if you feel free to do so.
Well, most people think I was fooled by Knobloch. I wasn't. Most people don't realize that I tried to do a delayed steal. So when I took off running, the ball was already on the way, halfway to the plate. By the time I heard the crack of the bat, I didn't know where the ball was. So I had to stop. By the time I picked up the ball, it was almost ready to hit off the fence, and then I took off running. A lot of people say, no, Knobloch faked me out because he went down to pretend that he had the ball. I said, well, if he faked me out, how come I didn't slide at second? And I also said that as I was running towards second, I saw the left fielder, Dan Gladden, moving towards the alley. That's why I stopped at second to see, because I knew the ball was headed somewhere in that direction. Now, by the time I heard the ball and saw the ball, I took off running, but unfortunately, he played the ball perfectly, got in quick. I got held at third base. Now, people can believe what they want to believe, and they're going to tell the story over and over. Yeah, it was a base running gaff because by the time I ran, I didn't take a look in. Well, doing a delayed steal, you don't have time to look in because you're trying to steal on the second baseman and the shortstop since they were playing back. I just picked the wrong pitch to go. But like I said, the story is never going to be what I say. It's going to be what people believe. And they believe that Knobloch faked me out.
Did you read all? Sorry, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say, and I have to live with that.
Did you read at all what Jimmy Williams was trying to tell you at third?
No, by the time I picked up the ball, I knew I had to run hard, and if I was going to be waved in, Jimmy would have made the sound, but I knew by the time I got there I had to stop because, like I said, when I saw the ball hit the fence and it was right there towards him, I knew that I probably didn't have a chance of scoring. But I figured, well, we got third and second, nobody out. But unfortunately, we weren't able to score. So, like I told a lot of people, okay, fine. I'll take the blame. If you want to blame me, fine. I just have to live with it.
Is there something you've been able to do 24 years later? Have you been able to do that?
I have no choice. I'm not going to go out and kill myself over it. I have a wife, 5 kids, 4 grandkids. I have a life to live. I'm not going to worry about what happened. It happened. Sure, I would have loved to have won. You can imagine. I've been the first person in the history of Major League Baseball to ever win 4 World Series on 4 different teams. But, it didn't happen. I have to live with it.
Well, 3 World Series rings is still very impressive, Lonnie. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Just wanted to finish what you're saying.
No, that's okay. It's just like I told the reporter in '92. I said, hey, he asked me when I hit the grand slam against Toronto if I felt vindicated. I said, look, I'm a black man living in America who's gone through drug addiction and overcome it. I've gone through a divorce and overcome it. I'll overcome this. Unfortunately, he writes in the paper the next day, Smith said because he's black, 91 World Series, because he's black, 91 World Series was blamed on him. But that's not what I said. This is why I don't speak to certain individuals. Same way when 1985, I'm in the batting cage, I'm hitting. The guy said, how do you like the American League? I just for fun, I said, oh, it sucks. But then I get out and we do the interview, and I told him, no, there's some of the best players in the American League playing here. I'm struggling, but I'll deal with it. But Title Smith says American League sucks on his story. Next thing I know, everybody's mad at me.
It's so funny because, go ahead, sorry, this is happening a lot too recently. I guess is what happened when we talk over the phone.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. I don't mind talking about my past. People believe what they want to believe, like I keep saying. I lived through it. I'll make it.
What I was going to say is that I interviewed Al Oliver about 6 months ago and how he once said back in March of 1985 to the AP, not to the AP, I think it was to the Los Angeles Times, where he said the news can make you a god or a devil, and I guess you can really attest to that, Lonnie, where the news media can make you a god or a devil in that situations.
Well, they can. It just depends on the individual. I give you another example. After the '89 season, I put on a little weight. So I'm working out, trying to lose weight. I was up to 225 pounds. And one of the local reporters at the time came, interviewed me. The guy who was working me out told him how much I came in at. This is about a week after I've been coming in. He puts in the paper, Smith's blown up to 255 pounds. I was 25 pounds overweight. But the way he wrote the story, 255 pounds, made it seem like I was a balloon, so I had to deal with it. And once again, it just depends on the individual and what he wants to get out of the story. The same way with the players, same way with entertainers all over the place. It is what it is. You just have to learn to live with it.
Except though I was taught in journalism classes about ethics and libel and slander, and so it would have been hard in your case to prove that your words were taken out of context or they tried to smear you, Lonnie, but certainly, though, you must not have been very happy at all the fact that your words were taken out of context or they were blown out of proportion.
Oh, I'm never happy with it, but, if I act on it, what good is it going to do me? Heck, I could have acted on it when I went to the trial, the cocaine trial. I could have came back and sued years after the fact that I went into rehab, that the trial happened. And then the following year, the new commissioner, Uberov, decided he's going to level suspensions and fines and everything on me for what? I did what you asked me to do. But because I was in the trial, you want to suspend me? You want to fine me 10% of my salary? I didn't mind doing the random drug testing, for my career, because I had to do that in order to prove to people that I was clean. But to fine me and threaten to suspend me and then put me on community service just because I did what you asked? But I dealt with it, and I got through it. I mean, I had people from the NAACP, I had the Rainbow Coalition calling, I had the Baseball Association players wanted to fight it, and I said, no, just let it go so I can get it over with. Of course, I had to do what he asked me to do, but hey, I got through it.
And yes, you did. You had a very nice career. Finally, last question before we go. Two of your former teams, the Cardinals and Royals, whom we talked about in this interview, they're both doing very, very well. And they met up 30 years ago in the World Series. They could do it again this year. If it is a Cardinals-Royals World Series, who do you see coming out on top and why?
That's a tough one. Because I really like the Royals, their team. The Cardinals, St. Louis always has my heart. I mean, I was never treated so fairly and so well than I was in St. Louis. So I would probably favor St. Louis just a little bit more because of that. I mean, neither organization is the same from when I played. I mean, different ownership. I don't think anybody's hardly left, with the exception of George Brett still being around in Kansas City. But, St. Louis will probably have my heart a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, Lonnie Smith, you've been a great guest. Thank you, and thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. I am Corey Stolzenbach. Have a good one, everybody.